With barely 52 days to the June 24th polls, this morning we've been joined by the mayoral candidate of the All People's Congress Party for Freetown Municipality, Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr, and she's here to talk about her plans if re-elected as mayor of Sierra Leone's capital. Good morning and welcome to Voshuma. Yvonne?
Good morning, Samuel. Good morning, Phoebe. Good morning, viewers.
All right, so like Phoebe said, we do value your inputs, but please, as always, we continue to make this plea that you just tailor your issues, your comments, your questions to the issues being discussed. Let's start off. First off, what is left that you think you need to go back and to finish?
Thanks so much, Samuel. Transform Freetown was very, very clear. It was a clear plan that was developed with Freetonians. If you remember back in 2018, my approach to governance is inclusive, but it's also transparent, and it requires planning and projection of that planning and reporting. So back in 2018, we engaged 15,000 of our residents. We moved around the city, but we also then brought professionals, government, public sector workers, government workers, NGOs, development partners together, and we came up with Transform Freetown. 19 specific targets, which represent 11 priority sectors grouped into 4 clusters. So we have a clear roadmap. And as you would know, because I've come here year after year, every year we report on how far we've gone with all of those, with the various targets. On environmental management, for example, planting 1 million trees. We would have finished that by June 2023. We'll have just a few 100,000 left. I think it's about 200 and something thousand. So we've done 800,000 plus by June 2023. Right. When it comes to protecting the environment, though, it's not just planting trees. And this is why, for me, it's, as I look to this next term, I look at it differently. I recognize now that we never were in a vacuum. If you remember, I ensured that even with the development of Transform Freetown, we did it in collaboration with government ministries. We did it in collaboration with development partners. Most importantly, we did it in collaboration with Freetonians. But there's a challenge.
Which is?
And the challenge is mandates, policy, and political will. So this weekend, I went to hike in Takugama, which is up in the mountains, just behind Regent. I was there for about 2 hours, doing what normally is a really relaxing exercise, good exercise, we were just talking about exercise, walking in the woods. But I was heartbroken to see the devastation of the natural environment, the green belt. And I don't say this because I love trees. I do love trees, but I say this because I love people. And one thing the people need for life is water. And the trees are not there just because. The trees protect the water catchment. And many viewers will remember, it was an AYV recording we all saw when the Minister of Lands at the time and the Deputy Minister of Water were having a conversation at the base just below Guma. And the point was being made by the Deputy Minister, you need to stop these constructions because we're going to have a disaster. The dam could break, people's lives could be lost, but significantly, what we saw and what we're already seeing and what I saw when I went up to Takugama, I went to the Takayema Dam. It was dry. It was dry. Why are our dams dry? The Babadori Dam is dry. The Congo Dam is low. The Guma Dam is low. Because of deforestation. So
these are the things you look forward to address. So just before we get to the, forgive me, just before we get to that, let's have a report card of what you've done with the environment, like you've started, what you've done with the environment.
We've planted trees. We introduced flood mitigation, which enabled many, many residents. And the other day I was talking to a lady who said to me, Amy, every year, what's happening in the Kaisa me os, but now una can build gutter from me os, and road, and now we don't have flooding. We introduced flood mitigation, which became a phenomenon that everybody now identifies with and understands. We built resilience among communities, the CDMCs, the Community Disaster Risk Management Committees, right across Freetown. We have SOPs with them. We help them to move people. We've dredged the waterway at Culvert. We famously, because I'll say famously because the people of Crew Bay always remember that, we moved that broken bridge, which was the cause of most of the flooding that was happening, the preventable flooding that was happening at Crew Bay. But beyond that, we've also ensured that within the communities themselves, we've done mapping and we've improved drainage. I think a major part of the tree planting is the slope stabilization. So we have communities now where trees are planted, which means that they don't, and in the rainy season, the soil doesn't run off and doesn't then lead to flooding. So when it comes to the environment, we've also, and many people won't understand this right at the start, but when you talk about the environment and you talk about climate change, you need to also talk about extreme heat. It's not just the flooding, it's the heat that people suffer. So if you see what we've done in markets, in Calabar Town, in Congo Market, in Bombay Street Market, we've provided shade covers for market women to protect them from heat. And very recently, we're partnering with an organization called Mayor, who are helping poor communities to change their roofs. If you live in a slum community, in fact, if you live in an informal settlement and you live in a house made of corrugated iron, what we call palm body, can you imagine how hot that gets in the daytime? And the sun comes right through because that corrugated iron actually absorbs the heat.
Right.
We've been replacing them and putting a plastic film which reflects the sunlight. And I went into one of those homes in Crew Bay where we're measuring the temperatures with Mir, and there's a 6-degree reduction. So we've worked with communities, we've worked on tree planting, but let me come back to what I saw at Takugama. Because what I saw was a destruction
in a moment
of the forest.
Part of the transform Freetown.
Which can't happen, no. Phoebe, just let me finish the sentence. I said I'm taking a different approach. And the approach I'm taking is recognizing that the council never ever we can't, on so many levels, achieve our objectives if at the central government level there isn't an alignment of direction. There has to be a protection, because when it comes to conservation of the forest, that Western Eyre Peninsula, WFP did a report just a few months ago that showed that we lost over 1,500 hectares of forest. This is where we have NPAA, we have EPA, we have Ministry of Environment, we have Ministry of Lands. But what the forest guards showed me, the Takugama forest guards showed me, they showed me houses being built in the forest. And they said, when we call, they get orders from above. So we need to look at these things holistically, whether it's road construction or it's forest preservation. When it comes to these activities, we need to know that the journey to transform Freetown has to be supported by policies at the national level. You've attributed some of your challenges
for limitation to the fact that while you were in office as mayor, your political party you were given ticket under differs from, of course, the political party that sits on the executive throne of governance right now. If people choose to vote President Bio, should they also choose to vote for Gento to eradicate that level of problem where if they vote you and probably President Bio wins again, there's still that issue of, you know, the center cannot hold? Shouldn't that probably be a reason why they should do President Bio and Gento?
Well, I don't know why you said probably, because I believe we're in a democratic election where the probability will be determined by the voters. And from my perspective, there are two things I would say in answer to your question, Phoebe. First, I'm going to take the theoretical approach, which is the approach I had last time around, which is that we are in a multi-party democracy. That is the reality. That means that what is being offered by a candidate should be able to be assessed on the basis of the candidate's experience, the candidate's commitment, the candidate's integrity, and their ability to deliver. Now, the point about the relationship between the central government and the local government also should hold in the context of a multi-party democracy. What we should have is an ability to go through an election cycle, to end the election cycle, and to say, now that's over. Now it's governance. It doesn't matter if you are green or red, blue or pink. What matters now
would you still
is that
like
we
to be in
work
office if you find yourself in the same situation where you become mayor and then President Bio is still president? Would you still want to go through that situation all over again?
So what I think is the best way to respond to that is to say, as I was referring to before, it's really important for us to have a multi-party democracy, but it's also really surprising. So for example, I'm wearing a red dress. When we won, when the elections ended, I made a conscious decision that during the elections, I am campaigning for my party. When I come to governance, I am working for everybody, and therefore I put down my party colors. And in my view, you put down your party colors in governance and you take them back up when you are in the political cycle.
Now, I asked you that question under the context of how the central and the local government in this Western area could not agree in some cases, and as you have explained in some interviews, became a limitation to some of the things you could have accomplished in office. So I ask again, under that context, would you still want to be put in that situation?
So, you know, for some viewers, they may not understand what you mean by that situation. So I will elaborate for you. The situation I found myself in was one where I was willing, ready, and committed to working for all, and said so many times, and yet found myself after the 8th May speech, in which APC executive members and APC generally leadership were referred to as terrorists, found myself in a very interesting situation. In 2019, when we introduced, in 2020, when we introduced the new revenue property rate reforms, which would increase revenue and enable council to do more work for Freetonians, our revenue collection was stopped for an entire year. I found myself in a situation where legitimate travel, which was mirrored right as I was going through the process, we had AFCON. We had the government, the Ministry of Sports, take 70+ people to Cameroon, paid their hotel bills, paid their per diem. They were not staff of the ministry. They were not staff of government. They were revelers, but staff of city council, not staff, a consultant to city council. That was the point. She wasn't staff, but she was a consultant, paid for by a foreign donor, sitting next to, in the office next to mine, working and bringing revenue to council, revenue through international collaborations to the tune of over $4 million. I found myself through an ACC, going through an ACC investigation that went on for 1.5 years. I found myself also being the subject of a special audit, of a parliamentary inquiry, of an administrative inquiry by the ministry, of CID charges, of criminal charges. I'm going through a court case. I was in court yesterday. So for the viewers who may not understand what Phoebe means, I think what she's saying is, would I like to do that all over again? The answer is no, but the answer is not to vote for Gento. The answer is to vote for Dr. Samura Kamara, because there you have experience in 2 places.
But Gento is not contesting the election as a presidential candidate.
No, but you said, if your statement was...
You just said not to vote for Gento, vote for Samura Kamara.
No, because your statement was, the premise you laid was, Bio, therefore Gento, and not Yvonne. And my premise was, Yvonne, therefore not Gento, but therefore not Bio, but Samura Kamara. So I just turned over what you presented.
Let's get to talk about, I mean, you're still running on the transformed Freetown agenda, correct? And we were talking about the environment.
5 more?
Yes.
To do more.
we were talking about the environment. Apparently, an aspect we did not get to has to do with the beautification of Freetown, the sanitization of Freetown, sanitary, And many people were looking forward to, oh, Freetown is cleaning. With your initiative, with central government's initiative of a monthly cleaning exercise and all of that. But we've seen just 1 or 2 hours of downpour, Freetown is again. So what are your successes with regards to the beautification of Freetown, sanitation, sanitization of Freetown? So let's get into that.
Okay, great. So this again comes to the fact that there has to be a comprehensive solution, and central government and local government have to work together. When it comes to the flood mitigation that I mentioned,
right.
I'm not in office, and you're quite right. Rains have fallen. I haven't been in office for 2 months plus now. And by this time in 2018 and onwards, since my mayoralship, I would have by now instituted flood mitigation activities. And you might say, well, flood mitigation activities are annual, they're short term. What about the long term? What about the improvement of drainage? And I'll say to you, that is firmly in the mandate of SLRA. In the old days, and I say the old days with a smile because it was only 5 years ago, but before I became mayor, Freetonians would be accustomed to seeing the city council doing some minor roadworks because there was a budget that used to come to city council from the road maintenance fund to do road maintenance, small works. When I became the mayor, in my first meeting with the board of SLRA, I was told that Freetown no longer was considered to have feeder roads, and therefore the budget was stopped. So we never ever, in the entire time I was mayor, received funding for any sort of road improvements or road construction from the central government, from RMFA. Now, coming on to the beautification, I always say cleaning is not an event. It is a process, and it requires systems. And those systems we built from the Cleanest Zone competition, where we got people excited, motivated to take ownership of cleaning their own communities. And we're successful for the first year because, of course, it's carrot and stick. You know, the carrot was the prizes. I mentioned earlier how in 2020, our revenue was stopped for 1 year. It's hard for you to think, imagine you are in a situation as a business person or as an employee, and you are out of work for a year. You have no revenue. So much in your home will go backwards, right? Maybe some of your kids will not be able to continue in school. Maybe you have to move out of your home. Well, if a council doesn't have revenue for 1 year, I can tell you a lot of what you start, you end up not being able to continue. And the Cleanest Zone competition was one such. But let's move on to the transfer stations. We were building transfer stations so that waste could be collected in smaller areas. We divided the city, 48 wards. We grouped them into 6, as we had 8 blocks. In those 8 blocks, we had a transfer station to be built in each of the blocks. But you'll also famously remember the scene of the then Minister of Lands coming with soldiers and destroying one of those transfer stations as it was being constructed with soldiers. And that was covered on television. But it went beyond that, because even though we eventually did complete 5 of them, we were never able to operate them because of internal challenges and refusals for sign-offs. So that notwithstanding, sanitation has definitely been an area of achievement, because one thing that we were able to get right, one thing that we were able to get funded were the tricycle groups. So we were able to create employment for over 2,000 young people who now have, you see them all over the city, now have tricycles. They do 2 things. One is household waste collection. So Phoebe, you're not a Freetonian. You live in rural. But I know, Samuel, are you a Freetonian?
No.
Rural?
Yes.
Oh, I have no Freetonians in the room. Okay, so the Freetonians who are listening, you know that we have Fight Me in Freetown. We know you have the numbers of our tricycle groups. And we know that now we've increased the number of people who used to have their waste collected at their homes from 8,000 when I came in 2018 to over 45,000 now. Over 45,000 households registered for waste collection. So we have that, and that means people who would previously be dumping are now having their waste safely collected. But that's not enough, because the streets will always get dirty. And we had 98 streets which were being swept by tricycle groups, by young people, adding to their own revenue that they're getting from households. Now we also hadn't, if you wake up in the morning, of course, like I said, I've been gone for 2 months. I'm not sure what's happening. I see the streets aren't being swept. I understand that arrangements have changed, but those arrangements are what you do and put in place for sustainability. But you also then need recycling, because we have a major plastics challenge, and you also need a sanitary landfill. And when it comes to that sanitary landfill, for which land has been secured in Hastings, this is a project that started with the World Bank in 2018, and I was very, very involved in the design of it. Now, unfortunately, there's nothing that you can do with the world, not fortunately, as it happens, let me rephrase that. There's nothing you can do with the World Bank on your own as a local council. You always have to work through a ministry. And our ministry is the Ministry of Finance, working with the local government
Yvonne,
division.
Still coming back to the beautification.
Just to say that sanitation, that sanitary
Still
landfill
to come back to the
has not
beautification
happened.
and sanitation.
Okay.
We still in this situation. Well, you've not been in office for the last 2 months,
Yes.
but the last rainy season as well. When it rains, even if it's for 10, 20 minutes, you see some parts in Freetown, part of the CBD, that experiences flood. Pademba Road, for example, it's part of the CBD.
Absolutely.
You go to the beach, you would see seaweed at the beach.
Coming on.
Exactly.
Yes.
And you know, it's part of Freetown.
Absolutely.
It's part of the beautification that we have that place cleaned. Why weren't you able to successfully have the beach, for example, clean? Because the Lumley Aberdeen Beach is where not just international tourists, but even local tourists, it's the go-to spot for people.
It used to be my walking spot.
But why weren't you able to have that place clean?
Mandates, Phoebe, mandates. The Ministry of Tourism, very early in 2018, was on the radio with the National Tourist Board and said, I think it's 300 meters from the sea in is the responsibility of the Ministry of Tourism. You will note that the Ministry of Tourism has in their budget from the government beach cleaning. So you will also see that Freetown City Council does not clean the beach because it's not our mandate. There was a time when there was a discussion about us stepping in, but it's, you know, the beach, if you remember, Phoebe, in 2018, there were no structures along the sand side of the beach. Now, if you go there, it is packed. Every single inch has been taken, and that's been given to them by the Ministry of Tourism. We're not informed. If they have toilets, we don't know. What their cleaning arrangements are, we don't know. So it's that thing where if you tie one's hands behind your back, you know, in terms of information, it's the same even with the building permits. This is something that I've spoken about times without number.
So the beach is not within the mandate of the City Council.
If you see the cleaning going on by the beach.
But the Pademba Road example I cited, when it rains, the flooding is within the FCC's
So
mandate.
let me tell you about Pademba Road. And this is why I said, this time around, 5 years of experience, I've learned a lot. I've understood that what's on paper does not necessarily translate, and when I say paper, in the law, does not necessarily translate to what's done in practice. Pademba Road has a major drainage challenge. The slope of the drainage is such that the water, if you go at any point in time after the rain and you see that the water settles, it doesn't soak away. I don't know if you've seen that. And then you'll see that coming from the hill inside PWD, which leads you up to the new road, the hillside bypass. If you're familiar with that, I'd love you to walk up there. That famous gutter, Samba gutter, that's up there. It runs from the new road right down to the outlet, and it goes past Pademba Road. I followed that gutter in 2019 as part of our flood mitigation work. I went right up, and we took FCC excavators and dug out Samba gutter. People were walking on it. Nobody knew where the gutter was and where the street was because it was full of silt. And why was it full of silt? Because the way the new hillside bypass was being constructed, all that runoff, there's a big gutter at hillside bypass. Then there's a narrow channel. And then it opens up into a big, wide, I don't know what they call those circular things, I've forgotten the name, which then goes into Samba Gutter. And the design means that the water, obviously, if it's channeled into narrow, it just gushes out. And with it comes the silt. So what we need is better design. But that is SLRA, unless they want to devolve to the council. And that happens in many countries. In many countries, these sorts of road constructions, management of drainage, and of course, importantly, building permits. Let me tell you something else that causes flooding in the city.
But the flooding itself, aside from the flooding, once the water dries up, you see that all the filth that was in the gutters, whether it's the empty bottles or plastics, they all just come gushing on the street.
And they get cleared. But that's not the sustainability. The sustainability is actually to build systems. They do get cleared. When I'm in office, there's no way, Phoebe, you're going to have that happening, not even overnight. Because as most people know, I'm the mayor who people have their phone numbers. I'm the mayor who watches what's going on social media.
But Yvonne, it was still happening.
Yes. Sorry, beg your
pardon? It was still happening.
Staying there?
It was still happening, even while you were in office.
Because the design does not achieve the free flow of the water. It will also happen because we don't have plastic policies. And you'll understand that in this country, the mayor cannot institute a plastic policy for the companies. Because in the same way, if you remember, in 2019, we went through, we followed what the law said, what the Local Government Act said, and we increased local tax. Do you know what your local tax is? 5,000 leones. Can you buy a plate of rice for 5,000 leones? Can you buy a liter of fuel for 5,000 leones? No, you need 4 local tax payments to be able to buy 1 liter of fuel to go and clear garbage. But the local tax, we increased it, following the rules, following the act. We had to publicly tell the public 3 months before. We had to pass a resolution, and we did. And our local tax went to 10,000. And it was fine. For 1 year, we had it 10,000. The next year, the Minister of Local Government said, no, you can't have your local tax at 10,000. You have to be the same like every other city, every other local council, even though, of course, Freetown is so different. And they unilaterally changed our local tax back to 5,000. So the point I'm making is that we're not working in isolation. And the Roads Authority, when it comes to the design of gutters, when it comes to making policies which will impact companies operating in Freetown, we cannot make them on our own.
But we've experienced other policies instituted by your predecessor that helped to contribute towards revenue generation. I can recall the Operation Weed, the free flow. You throw garbage in the street, you're fined. You urinate, you're fined.
Yes.
That was also a revenue generation.
But it wasn't, unfortunately, it wasn't sustained.
But it was working for a while until inconsistency on the part of the FCC came in, and then it stopped.
Well, I can't speak on what my predecessor did.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is there are other policies you can institute for revenue generation.
Oh, yes. And
which also contributes towards beautification.
65% of our revenue comes from property rates. And in this high inflation environment where fuel went from when we started in office at 6,500 to when I left office at 21,500, I need you to understand that when you want to do work, you need finance to do the work. Just in the same way as when you run your home. Phoebe, one of the big iconic buildings in this city is the new City Hall. And I'm really grateful and proud that I played my role in supporting the construction. I didn't raise the finance, that was done before I came, but I was there to oversee the construction. Let me tell you about the cost of electricity. When we
let's stay on that lane on the policies other policies that could have been instituted as a revenue generation?
I want you to listen. Cleanest zone competition was a policy that was incentivizing, motivating, and not one that required people to be afraid. People began to clean their communities because they were excited about the prizes they would get, and they took ownership. We saw it. We had it televised here. You came with me, I think. No, it was Stella. Stella came with me. She was one of the judges that went around the communities. When it comes to revenue, I want you to understand what we're talking about in terms of real cost. These things that you play around on the edges, a fine here, a fine here, I know the budgets. I know where the revenue comes from. The real revenue comes from property rates, which is why one of our major achievements was to digitize properties, the property rate system, and to move from 37,000 properties in our books with only a few Freetonians playing their role and being diligent residents to having 129,000 properties. In the first year, we were stopped from using the system. But I really do want to tell you about the cost of electricity at the City Hall. When we moved in the first year, it was 374 million. When I was leaving now, it was 2.5 billion. So when you talk about revenue, you must also think about cost. You must also recognize the cost that FCC has to spend, has to meet.
Were you paying your bills to EDSA and Guma?
Oh, yes. Who else were we paid to? EDSA. Right. Well, there's nobody else.
All right.
And EDSA, when we got to a point where we were struggling, because obviously these bills, EDSA increased their tariffs threefold. And we got to a point where at one point, we actually had EDSA cut us off for 3 weeks, and we had to run the generator at 21,500 leones for a litre. That was itself, really expensive.
All right.
We went into a payment plan, 200 million a week being paid to EDSA. So everybody wants to use the City Hall. Everybody loves the City Hall. But we need to make sure the City Hall does not become run down.
Let's run through some messages here this morning. Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr is the most traveled mayor in the history of Freetown municipality, but there's little to show for it. She has raised funding both from central government and global partners, but even the cemeteries in Freetown are in bad condition. She employed parallel structure at the council, most of whom is her cronies, and puts them in charge of huge projects, but nothing to show for it. That's from David Williams from Kissy Road.
Please continue.
Justice Moy Samba is saying, Samuel and Fabian, our former mayor is just too economical with the truth. I know of a situation where the president called the head of a parastatal to tell him to help the mayor. I'm telling them that she is the face of our capital city and that they should put her at disposal all she needs to do her work. And it was even evident by the disbursement of funds to our council. But the mayor herself didn't help the situation. She was always political in her job. Mayor knows very well that the president was very open-handed to her, irrespective of her political beliefs, and it was evident during the launch of the free quality education program at the Miata Conference Center. She was seated very close to Mr. President.
Sorry.
Should I continue?
Bangura says, with all the constant humiliation in office during her tenure in office from the SLPP Power Central government, Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr still did her best to transform the city of Freetown.
Samboy Casanova is saying, is Freetown transformed in your eyes?
Mohammed Alim Conte says, the cleanest zone competition was a good initiative and the community stakeholders really bought into it, but only God knows why it was scrapped.
You're the most decent politician in our country. Keep it up. Mayor Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr from Mohammed Conte.
Samuel, please keep it going.
All right. Joby Bangali Jr. is saying, is Takugama and Mile 14 under her municipality? Please, can she help me?
Well, Sam Conte says, it's about time to kick out Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr, deny her re-election as she wants after her miserable performance that led to loss of lives and property in Freetown municipality. Vote Chief Mohammed Gento Kamara as mayor for better Freetown.
Raymond Elena is saying, good job, Madam Sawyerr, but come June 24th, the people will make a better decision by voting Gento.
Max Jallo says the same parliament and local government, they are the problem in Salone. Leave the mayor to add or reduce revenue taxes.
Abbas Habib Koka Bangali is saying, Yvonne has already told you guys her achievement, planting trees, leave her alone.
Abbas Habib Koka Bangali says, what's on paper do translate. If you do your job, working with government of the day, you were focusing on being a running mate to Samura Kamara. That is why you were so political. To a point, you were labeled as tribalistic mayor. Buwa Bise Kemokai.
Eddie Grant is saying any mayor that wants to succeed in Freetown must have a good political backing, or else it will be a fruitless venue.
Aisata Jilo Kamara says, keep up the good work, Madam Mayor.
Raymond Elena, Madam Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr has nothing to show forth within 5 years.
Yassim says, the mayor is blaming the central government and the central government is blaming the Russian military service in Ukraine.
All right, Ronald Georgestone is saying, let Freetonians decide if they feel that you have done enough to get a second term. The proof in the pudding is in the eating. I believe it's left with Freetonians.
French Sylvanus says, let her learn to take responsibility.
So long as central and local governments aren't working in partnership, then many of the projects aimed at developing Freetown for all and sundry will never be achieved, which is sad, as unity is strength, but division persists. From Ronald Breastford Ignatius Georgestone.
And the same Ronald Georgestone says, so long as central and local government aren't working in partnership, then many of the projects aimed at developing Freetown for all and sundry will never be achieved, which is sad, as unity is strength.
All right, my final message is saying, come June 24, Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr will surely win the election. That from Ekundayo Marcus Stanley.
Can I respond?
Just a minute. Oh, Samuel, please keep it going.
All right, I think that's my final message.
Let me respond, because there's quite a lot here, so we can take another round if needed.
Yes, quickly go
Okay,
ahead.
so nothing to show. Well, I totally disagree. Wilberforce Market is under construction. We have built for the first time in the history of Sierra Leone, not just in Freetown, a wastewater treatment plant, which means that in King Tom, instead of the feces going onto the dump site and polluting the water, it's now being treated, and the treated material is being developed for use as fertilizer in agriculture. We have nurseries settled in markets, Congo Water Market. There are children there who will talk to you and sing for you, and their lives have been changed. And we have more of those markets those nurseries in markets for market women being built. We have over 1,200, 2,000 young people who are now self-sufficient and working as tricycle operators. We have over 500 women who are working in urban farming. We have a feasibility study, not a pie in the sky, let's hope for the best, but a technical feasibility study funded by C40 cities underway for a cable car system in our city. We have 65 water kiosks and 15 public toilets, which are the construction will be starting in the next few weeks. We also have waste to energy in Susan's Bay. We have at the Hagan Street Market, if people remember the waste to energy plant, the biodigester at Aberdeen, which is fueling energy for the Aberdeen Women's Center. Right. We have a similar one being put into Hagan Street, which will provide lighting for the Susan's Bay community. If you go there right now, you'll see post the fire, widened drainage, 6 toilets, which are under construction. So I have no doubt from Ward 399 to 446. And the good thing about the way I work is everything is documented with photographs, with pictures, with locations. So for those who perhaps it's a genuine question and the person generally does not know about any work I've done, please visit the FCC website and fcc.gov.sl and look under Transform Freetown. All the reports are there. And the mention of the Aberdeen roundabout, indeed, as I said, you know, I made it a priority to work with the central government, but I can't ignore the fact that for 1 year revenue was stopped. that I was taken to the ACC for an investigation for 1.5 years, which was inconsistent with the approach to similar issues in the audit report, that I was the subject of an inquiry from the Ministry of Local Government, which has not happened to any other local council, that I was accused in the August 10 report, that I was named as a person of interest. But when you read what was written, I was told I organized a prayer meeting to topple the government. And that prayer meeting, the planning, was instituted by Sister Wisdom Kanu. I wrote to AYV on behalf of the religious leaders. I have the email asking for AYV to give airtime to those religious leaders to pray for the peace of Sierra Leone. And that was widely known. So I can't ignore these things. So it's very nice for people to say, oh, she's political, she's making excuses, but the reality is the reality, and you can't get away from that. Someone also said about why was the cleanest zone scrapped? It was, as I tried to explain, the year we started the cleanest zone competition, the following year was when our revenue was stopped for a year. I also wanted to mention, in case people have forgotten, because I know 5 years is a long time. Some things don't stay at the top of one's mind. But you know, one of the things that I'm really, really proud of is the fact that even though we don't have a specific mandate in health, you know, beyond supporting PHUs, which is very vague. We're not really, you know, we're given $1 million leones per PHU for the year to pass to the PHU. That can do nothing really. But in spite of that, we were able to raise funding for PHU upgrades. The Ross Road was upgraded and had more maternity facilities, and same with Greybush. But it didn't stop there. Through conversations with gynecologists, it was brought to my attention, really in answer to my question about maternal mortality. And I raised with Mama Pikin Foundation, excuse me please, as the implementing
Sorry, we'll come back to continue. We'll come back to continue that. It's 9 o'clock. We need to head back to Studio 2 and join David Romy Wilson.
We still have with us Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr, the mayoral candidate for the Opposition All People's Congress Party for Freetown Municipality. And you were responding to some of the comments and questions from our audience.
Thanks, Samuel. But I've just seen the clip, which I'll just watch. And I think the statement that Sierra Leone would be a peaceful country if we only had SLPP, it really speaks volumes. This is exactly, I think this explains my scenario. I'm obviously not SLPP. And I understand that the statement went on to say, it wasn't shown here, but that if you were born APC and you died APC, that you would go to hell. I mean, in Arabic, which is Jannah? No, Jannah is heaven. But yes, that was said. So I think that sort of speaks to the challenge that I've faced. It's disingenuous for anyone to have seen the last 5 years where I spent probably 30%, 35% of every week responding to some fake allegation or the other, and yet say, oh, you know, she's making excuses. No. I'm stating the facts. If you choose to think I'm making an excuse, well, I can't help that, but I'm stating the fact. Now, coming back to what I was saying before we had the interruption, or the intervention, I was talking about health. And one of the interventions that I'm most excited about, even though the role I played was one of raising funds and being on that steering committee, is to do with the funding for the postgraduate training for gynecologists and pediatricians, which is being implemented with Mama Pikin Foundation and the Ministry of Health. And how did I get involved? Well, as you remember, I said we have 19 targets. One of those targets, and because our targets were built together with communities and with professionals, some of those targets, we recognized that our role would be to assist. And one of those targets was to reduce maternal mortality. And I spoke with Fatou Fona, who I didn't know, but I saw her online talking about work she was doing with women in Greybush PHU, giving them buckets to encourage them to come and have their babies in the clinic. I asked her, what would make the biggest difference? And she said, having more trained gynecologists in country. We don't do postgraduate training for gynecologists. And I was able to work with my networks and raised $3.5 million, which does not come to me, does not come to City Council, but went through the Mama Pikin Foundation in partnership with the ministry. And this is known. I was at the launching. It was acknowledged. So for those who say I have done nothing, I am so grateful to God that we have achieved so much in spite of the challenges. Another thing which is just worth pointing out is when you talk about the environment, and I make the point that we need consistency, we need political will. And somebody said, is Takugama and Mile 14 within Freetown? No, it's not. But guess what? That's where the water catchment is for Freetown. Freetown's water comes from Guma. Guma is not in Freetown. So if you're concerned about Freetonians, and we're concerned that we don't in 2 to 3 years' time have no water, then you're concerned about protecting that source. That's why Freetown, the Tree Town, plans not just in Freetown, but in the Freetown Peninsula as well.
Let's quickly, as we try to round off this conversation, why should you be voted for or be re-elected as mayor of Freetown Municipality?
When I campaigned in 2018, my slogan then was for a community, for a progress, for a Freetown. I took all of what we talked about, from geomapping the city in order to increase revenue through digitized property rates, providing support to traders, investing in the sanitation, protecting the environment. Those aspirations for a community, for a progress, for a Freetown were translated into Transform Freetown. The sanitization, the beautification cannot happen in a vacuum. SLRA digs the roads and leaves the roads. I have letters, leaves the dirt on the side. EDSA puts poles. I'm sure many of you have seen them. They dig, the contractors, and then the mound of dirt is left around there. Those things are eyesores, and I have written and have not had responses. We've seen buildings being constructed in waterways. There was one in Lumley where I jumped into the waterway. Thankfully, that one was stopped. But there's one going on right now in Beckles Lane, in Brookfields, where the Met Police went, where I went. I didn't go physically, but I engaged, I wrote, I called the IG. Do you know what? That structure is going up still. And that is going to create more floods, more leakage, more drainage challenges. The same is in Kongowata. Car wash was being constructed by the Honorable in the gutter. I wrote to EPA, I wrote to Ministry of Environment, I wrote to Ministry of Lands. One of them wrote back to say, we're looking into it. Less than a year later, fully constructed. Rainy season, flooding. We need consistency. We need first statements which are made on public platforms about caring for the environment to translate into reality. We need our beaches to be protected. We need for the sand mining to be stopped. We need those fires to stop burning along the peninsula.
And if you are re-elected, those things will stop?
I'm re-elected if Dr. Samura Kamara is elected along with me. Those things will stop. If I'm re-elected, I will continue to fight for the transformation of our city. But I don't believe I'll be re-elected on my own. I am confident that with the cost of living crisis that we're experiencing, with the human rights abuse that we've seen, with the devastation of lives that is rampant across the city, but not just the city. This is a country where we talk about caring about climate change. We talk about caring about the environment. We talk at the national level about ecotourism. But a single man was given a license without going through a procurement process to be the sole exporter of timber. And timber exports shot up.
All right.
When you shoot up timber exports, you destroy forests, you destroy trees,
there will come a time when the campaigns are declared officially open. Then we'll definitely bring all of you here to do that. But thank you very much, Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr. It's been a pleasure having you here. We've enjoyed the privilege of your time this morning.